So the title of the talk is The System Genealogy of the Global Environment as a Complex System. So Earth system science presents itself as the study of the Earth's surface as a complex system, studying the interactions between the atmosphere, the oceans, Earth's surface, and living beings. It has always presented itself as something big in the contemporary earth sciences and in the contemporary sciences at large. Hans-Joachim Schellenhuber has talked about earth system analysis as a sort of second Copernican revolution, and he means it seriously in the article. It is in this field in which the famous concept of the Anthropocene has emerged in 2000. So the aim of the talk will be to try to answer the question of what is Earth system science, and there are many reasons to ask, among which the scale of the scientific revolution proclaimed, the fact that it has always been a science forthcoming, and yet it already underpins important scientific and political discourses and concepts. So the plan that I will follow is the following. I will start with some elements of history regarding the institutions underpinning Earth system science. Then I will question the idea that it is a new conception of the Earth, or the idea that it is the first one that we have a global view of the Earth. And then I will argue that Earth system science's practice can be understood as a kind of renewal of late 18th century theory of the Earth. And then I will discuss some elements regarding Earth system science as a politics of nature. So when asked what is a system science is commonly referred to what is known as the Bretherton diagram, which was published in the late 80s and which depicted what was at the time the horizon for modeling in environmental and earth sciences. And the aim was to bring together the modeling of the physical climate system at the top of the diagram and the modeling of biogeochemical cycles at the bottom. So this diagram was published in a NASA report published in 1986, which title was Earth System Science, an Overview. It is the first time that we have the expression Earth System Science published. And this report, if you look at the 1980s decade, this report was part of a large institutional effervescence of publication of programmatic reports in the earth and environmental sciences. So famous climatologists, oceanographers, mathematicians, solar physicists, geochemists, ecologists, and so on and so forth gathered in the many institutions structuring and funding American and international sciences. And all these reports call for the emergence of an interdisciplinary and international research program studying the global changes of the Earth as a system. And all the words in yellow are the keywords structuring all the reports. And they had a very high idea of what they were doing at that time. They talk about the emergence of a new science of the Earth, a new paradigm for research in the earth sciences, or second Copernican revolution later on. Two elements underpin the idea that what was needed was a really new science of the Earth. The first one was the scientific emergency constituted by the global changes in the 80s, and the expression global changes took the meaning that it has today precisely in this decade, and it was in the title of all the reports. And the two paradigmatic examples of global changes were the ozone hole and climatic change. The second element which underpin the idea that a new science is needed is an ontological argument, which you can find in most of the report, namely the idea that we first recognized a new object, the Earth system, or the fact that the Earth functions as an integrated system with many interconnections between its various parts. And the narrative of all these reports was the following. So from the 50s to the 80s, we had many progress in various scientific disciplines such as solid earth physics, climatology, oceanography, ecology, and so on and so forth. But all this progress have remained isolated or separated within narrow disciplines. And what we need is an integrated discipline which will bring together all these disciplinary endeavors. And after the 80s, various institutional, the reports had various institutional effects with the publication of new books, new journals, new institutes and centers, and new education curriculum in the States with the label Health System or Health System Science. But really the two most important institutions regarding health system science back in the 80s were NASA on the one hand and the International Geosphere Biosphere Program, which is the institution which emerged out of the programmatic reports of the 80s. And after the 90s, the IGBP took over on the label Health System Science, and NASA somehow left it on the side. So this was for the institutional history underlying the emergence of health system science. Health system science is sometimes presented as sort of a new global view studying the interaction between the atmosphere, the ocean, health surface, and life. Yet it is not the first time that scientists have a global view on the Earth as a system. I mean, if we leave aside 18th century theories of the Earth, one can recognize at least three perspectives on the global Earth in the 70s, that is before Earth system science or before IGBP in the Earth and environmental sciences. You have geophysical conception of the Earth's surface, such as climatology, which study the interaction between atmosphere, ocean, and the soil with a physical perspective, namely with the tool of thermodynamics and fluid mechanics. At the same time, plate tectonics is also a sort of physical view of the global Earth, since it divides Earth into geometrical parts with mechanical properties. The second important global conception of the Earth at that time, or global perspective on the Earth, is within geochemistry. Here, the Earth is divided into various chemical reservoirs containing chemical entities and fluxes or pipes enabling matter to circulate between these reservoirs, such as the atmosphere, the ocean, and so on and so forth. And the last global view at that time was the biogeochemical conception, which is basically the same thing as the geochemical view, but it adds also the importance of living beings' influence on the circulation of chemical matter. So the point here is that we have at least three perspectives on the Earth, and I use the word perspective here in the sense advocated by Wimsatt, that is a given point of view defining a set of relevant variables or ways to decompose objects, problems to address, and so on and so forth. So the main point from this small part is that Earth system science clearly is not the first study of the interaction between ocean, atmosphere, solid Earth, and biosphere. All those perspectives I presented just precisely did this before Earth system science. So then what is the Earth system, or what is the system science, or what is the perspective of Earth system science? I will argue that the original breakthrough of Earth system science is the application of cybernetics and complexity theories to the Earth and the globalization of the environment. So it is well known that cybernetics and the neutron complexity theories were widely used by ecologists and to define and to study the functioning of ecosystem. But ecology's privileged scale of study is essentially local. It is a lake, a mountain, or a forest. The important development of the use of cybernetic views or complexity views applied to this was importantly put forward by the Gaia hypothesis developed by Lovelock and Margulis in the 60s and 70s. And Gaia, in their conception, can be defined as sort of the global ecosystem that is all living beings plus the environment with which they interact. And then Lovelock famously compared this entity, that is Gaia, the global ecosystem, or all living beings, and the environment with which they interact. So he compared this entity to an organism, and sometimes he compared it to the functioning of a thermostat. And Gaia's conception, I mean, I don't have the time to show it, but from a historical point of view, Gaia's conception of the Earth has been very influential for the post-90s system science and for the institutional effervescence, which I mentioned in the first part of the talk. And if you, I mean, one can follow the history of the main actors of the Gaia hypothesis and the system science and show that they used the cybernetics or complex sciences of that time. And Lovelock, who is the oldest of the story, used mostly first cybernetic and compared Gaia with the thermostat. Margulis, who was younger than Lovelock, then hinged on second cybernetics and orthopoiesis, and then later on the new generations drew from the Santa Fe complex system science. So Gaia's perspective starts with the recognition of living beings in the world. I mean, if you want to define what Gaia is as an entity, you first have to recognize where are all living beings at the Earth's surface, and then from here you just map out the interaction with which they have with their environment. The Earth system retains the Gaia perspective, but puts human actions rather than living beings at the center of the starting point to define the entity. So basically, the Earth system is all humanity's interaction with Earth's surface. And Earth system, I don't have the time to show all the historical elements and details which will back up this argument, but basically, Earth system science can be understood as the development of a science of the good management of the planet. This is a quote from the first report planning the constitution of IGBP. The IGBP will be carefully designed program of research directed at providing the information we need to assess the future of the Earth in the next 100 years, with an emphasis on processes that will change on timescales of decades to centuries. It will be a program of basic research with almost immediate practical applications in the management of resources at national and international levels, and as a means of improving the reliability of warnings of global change of significance to our environment and to humankind. So I'm now done with the second argument, namely the idea that Earth system science is not the first global study of the interaction between the atmosphere, the ocean, and so on and so forth, but the new perspective put forward by Earth system science is the study of sort of humanity's interaction with Earth's surface components. And then I will now develop and try to analyze the scientific practice underpinning Earth system science. So I will try to focus on 2 points in this part. First, to sort of describe the nature of interdisciplinarity, which was at stake in Earth system science, and try to pinpoint to the originality of Earth system science practice. So in order to do so, we need to analyze further IGBP structure. So IGBP was divided into a little bit more than half a dozen of core projects, and each project studied different things. One was centered on paleoclimate, another on atmospheric chemistry, another on terrestrial ecosystems, ocean biogeochemistry, and so on and so forth. So IGBP gathered thousands of researchers with a very wide array of practices. So then the question arises, who does and what is Earth system science as a scientific practice? The first answer is just to say that everybody, paleoclimatologists, oceanographers, climate modelers, ecosystem ecologists, geochemists, pedologists, etc., everybody do Earth system science. The problem with this answer is that Earth system science becomes a very vague label and does not capture a genuinely new practice which emerged after the 80s, which is at odds with the revolutionary claim from Earth system scientists. And if you look at the report of each core project, you will realize that Earth system science really pops out in one of the report, which is the overall synthesis of IGBP and not that one of a particular core project. And another remark is that there was one core project of IGBP, which was Global Analysis, Integration, and Modeling, or GAME, and then which was relabeled AIMS for Analysis, Integration, and Modeling of the Earth System. So this project does not have a book report, so to speak. And another peculiarity of this project it's that it was composed only of 10 to 20 theoreticians for this task force project, which had a very privileged role within IGBP, as compared to all the other core projects in which there was several hundred researchers. It's the only core project for which you will find a detailed list of the people who participated to it. And I will just want to emphasize here the importance of the privileged theoreticians and spokespersons who participated to this core project. To give just a few names: Will Steffen, Shel Nuber, Paul Crutzen, Tim Lenton, or Johan Rockström, are famous spokespersons who advocated for important concepts of IGBP, on which I will come back later. So another way to respond to the question of what is a system science practice is simply to say that it is whatever these privileged theoreticians do under the system science banner. And I would argue that what they did was the elaboration of a theory of the Earth, or a philosophy of natures, and the politics of the Earth. The major and most visible outcomes of their work, and in fact of IGBP's work, and then the new practice which emerged after the 80s was not so much the production of new data, nor the production of new results from modeling studies. The most visible outcome was the elaboration of new concepts. So in other words, a system scientist, quasi system scientist, is a philosopher or a theoretician. You may have heard about this concept. The most famous one is the Anthropocene, put forward by Paul Crutzen. Another important output of IGBP is the putting forward a new conception of the Earth as a complex system compared to a thermostat or to an organism. Another important concept from IGBP is that of planetary boundaries, which define 9 processes with levels within these processes in which we have to remain if we want to keep the planet habitable. Another of the concepts is that of tipping elements, which define vast regional ensemble which can abruptly shift if a little push destabilize them. And if we look further into IGBP major tasks, there is one quote which I found extremely revealing, and which you can find in one newsletter of IGBP. What is the nature of the Earth? The challenge for IGBP over the next 3 years is to make a significant contributions towards answering this question. I will skip this part. So to summarize several points I mentioned in this part, the first lessons of this part regard interdisciplinary practices within IGBP. There's many ways to understand IGBP's interdisciplinarity. The first one is that it gathered various disciplines within the same institution, and these are the various core projects of IGBP. The second important element is that models and global models of global changes had an important role as a boundary objects to gather these different disciplines. And the third point is that some theoreticians or important spokespersons within IGBP, most often physicists, had a particular role to elaborate and define IGBP's core practice and research programs. The second point which I want to want to retain from this part is the definition of a system practice. I didn't have time to develop, but what they did was the development of a new theory of the earth, which is a particular geological practice which emerged in the late 18th century and then sort of was abandoned in the 19th century, which can be also understood as the development of a philosophy of nature or politics of the earth. I still have 5 minutes, something like that.
Well, two, 3.
Okay, 2 or 3. So I will just go straight to one striking point, perhaps to launch the discussion, which is, for me, it was puzzling to find this out, is that Earth system science over the past years has been, has somehow been used to legitimize geoengineering. So I'll explain further. So geoengineering are the techniques envisaged to modify the climate at a global scale, which include the injection of aerosols in the stratosphere, the fertilization of the ocean, and other idea of that kind. There is a famous critique of geoengineering, which has been put forward by Clive Hamilton, which depicted as Promethean thinking with a given epistemology, which rests on the idea that we have a perfect understanding and prediction of the way the earth function. It also rests on a given ontology, that is the idea that nature is outside and predictable, and a given anthropology, that is the idea that it is man's role to control nature. Earth system science presents itself as a philosophy of nature, or the way to engage with nature on the earth, which goes at the opposite to Promethean thinking. Its epistemology that the Earth system, because it is too complex, is not predictable. The Earth system is not the external nature of modernity, but humanity is part of the Earth system. It's not only a physical system, but it's also a biological and a social system. And the anthropology is that we have to shift from control and domination of nature to care of the Earth system, or to the idea of care and love of nature or the Earth system. So what one should expect a distance from this. If the philosophy of nature is important regarding the position one will adopt regarding geoengineering, then one should expect a distance from Earth system science community to geoengineering. And yet, Paul Crutzen article was famous in 2006 advocates for geoengineering, and was very important for lifting the taboo for the discussion of geoengineering. Another element which was important for lifting this taboo was the report from the Royal Society. And on this report, on the cover of this report, it's no coincidence that you will find that the daisies of Lovelock and Watson Daisy World Model. And Lovelock himself has proposed the idea that we can put giant ocean pipes in the ocean as a geoengineering technique, which will help the Earth to cure itself. So I just, in this part, I just wanted to share my puzzlement about the importance of philosophy of natures if two apparently very opposite ones can lead to the same conclusions about geoengineering. And I leave you with the plan and conclusion of the talk. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot, Sébastien. I think that that's very in line for the transition to David's talk about a similar way of analyzing complex systems, or the vision of complexity, rich vision of complexity and drive some political consequences. So can you give back to me the organizer so that I can send it to David? And then David can share his presentation. And I mean, I've read David's papers, and I feel that there are many common points between what you present. So we'll have a rich discussion on that, I'm sure. So otherwise, if you can't do that, just you can log out and then log in, and I'll recover the organizer. Okay, thanks. Okay, so David, you should be able now to share your presentation.
Yes. Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Can you hear? Okay.
Right.
Thank you. So thank you for this invitation, and I will present some thoughts about dynamics and organization of social systems as complex systems. So sorry. So we have two main components when we look at social systems. One is their organization, and the other one is evolution. So in these 25 minutes, I will focus more on the question of evolution. But I will just say a few words of the frameworks where I placed myself to think about their organization. So this framework is stemmed from the work of Varela, Kaufman, and also more recently Monteville and Mossio, about the kind of closures that we can encounter in living systems. And there is this idea of triple closure theory that is a coupling between operational closure, catalytic closure, and constraint closure that enable what Dupuy has called complexification of complex systems. This means their capacity to become more and more complex. They have new emerging properties and new levels that emerge through time. So we can discuss more later about what exactly this closure means, but I guess most of you have heard of them, or at least for operational closure. I can just quickly remind what is operational closure, which is one of the initial works from Varela. So he defines autopoietic systems as networks of process of production, so transformation and destructions of components, which first, through their interaction and transformation, continuously regenerates and realize the networks of processes, so the relations that produce them. And second, constitutes the systems as a concrete unit in space, which is very important, in which its component exists by specifying a topological domain, so its boundary, of its realization of the networks. So we'll think about social systems and more generally living systems with this perspective. So here you see that when you adopt this perspective, then you should stop thinking about changing of states for when you analyze the systems, to think about processes and reconfiguration of the relationships between processes. So it is, I will try to see how we can have these perspectives on social systems. So now we will question the evolution of society's organization, having in mind that we have this entangled complex systems from neural dynamics and cell systems to human bodies and then social systems. So this is a conjecture that I will defend in this talk, and not just to form conjectures, but it will be like a way to have a blueprint in this talk. So this is something that has been stated by many people, in particular Jean-Pierre Dupuy, who gave a talk last time. So with the increase in destructive capacity of our societies, the increased interdependencies, and the percolation of ICTs, humanity is moving toward a leap in complexities that will constitute it at an autopoietic unit, a new organism, endowed with teleonomy. By this, what I mean is that, so we know that we are getting more and more interdependent, And I think that we are really going to a collective organism, not in the sense that we will have a central control systems or that there is a new thinking entity that will emerge, but in the sense that it will be autopoietic units that, as a consequence, is becoming immortal. I mean, by the fact that he's becoming a single entities, then it can all the fate of human and societies that are within these entities are binded together, and so now we will think about how these new entities might evolve. And just by the way, just what is first called with COVID-19. So just to give us some courage, some advice, humankind is becoming mortals, but this realization hits us like a sudden, like a solar remote big truck. Let's not panic yet. We'll still have plenty of time. Let's just go with it and learn. So this has been generated by an AI. I just gave it humanity is becoming mortal, and this is just invented little by later by an AI. So just I put this. We will come back to this later. So the question is now, since we are becoming more or less single entities, so which properties of our societies will increase or diminish the life expectancy of these humanity organisms? So I'm not telling that we'll necessarily die, but that since we are becoming mortals, then we have to think about what are the best way to organize ourselves so that we never die eventually. So for that, I will come to this distinction of Hayek between what is cosmos and a taxis, which is, I think, is very important to think about complex systems. So he said, while a cosmos of spontaneous order has no purpose, every taxis arrangement organization presupposes a particular end. And man forming such organization must serve the same purposes. The cosmos will result from the regularities of the behavior of the elements which it comprises. It is in the sense endogenous, intrinsic, or as the cybernetician says, self-regulating or self-organizing systems. So I will use this distinction to think about the evolution of human societies and their aggregation into more global entities. But now, so this was written in 1978. Now we will say more that the regularities of the cognitive capacities and connectivities of the elements which it comprises. So I will develop these ideas. So one first question is how you articulate cosmos and teleonomy. So I will. My hypothesis is that human societies or humanity as a whole, and even Gaia, as we spoke just before, are some kind of cosmos, so spontaneous orders. But still, it can have some kind of teleonomy. And to understand this, we can take the example of the Polya-Urn model that is Jean-Pierre Dupuis likes it very much. So Polya-Urn is a very simple stochastic models. You consider a urn that contains the blue balls and a white ball, and one experiment consists in pulling one ball from the urn, putting it back into the urns with another ball of the same color. And the question is how the proportion of the blue balls change. When you do that, what you see this is an example of one experiment that is repeated 1,000 times. You see that after some oscillation, this converges to a strong attractor, which is around 0.8 here. So if you are inside the urn and you look at the proportion, you have after sometimes the impression of teleonomy. The system is going toward 0.8. But the theory tells you that actually the proportion of the blue balls stabilize at a random value between 0.0 and 1. It means it could be anything between 0 and 1. And if you redo the process, then you will reach another attractors. So here you have a very, very simple system that has strong path dependencies, and that leads to an infinite number of attractors. So if you think of cosmos, you can think that it has no intrinsic tailor-autonomy, but with some path dependency, you can have some locally emergence of some tailor-autonomy and even eventually local taxes. So we would say that Cosmos can display local and even global emergent tailor-autonomy leading to local taxes. I mean, for example, think of the army. Army is a local taxis because it serves a very precise end, but it is quite contagious in human societies. So the question is, can we control or influence the emergence of these local taxis or this local tailor-autonomy from inside? For example, we have the impression that climate change is inevitable. So we have a direction of our global society toward modifying the Earth's climate. So can we change that? So I think there is two fatal conceits here. The first answer would say, yes, we can just by acting on the right trigger. And it is mostly the way we act in the modern societies on nature. We say, okay, we can apply fertilizer and grow more easily plants. We can apply antibiotics and we will have no more bacteria. But when you do that on complex systems, sooner or later, out of scope spatiotemporal scales will backfire. So bacteria become resistant, you ring the soils, etc. So if you don't take into account the whole systems and you just only act some triggers, then it backfires. The other fatal conceit is that to say just no, we cannot change or influence the path of a complex system because they are too complex for our human mind, and we should leave them to their own fate. It's the credo of neoliberalism with an invisible hand. So for this, I would just urge these people that think like that just not to take vaccines, because, for example, vaccines is a very great achievement of human mind, being able to act on complex systems, that is the immune systems. And if you think about the cosmos as having many or even an infinite number of attractors, then it is very relevant to ask ourselves if we can choose one of these attractors instead of just letting these systems go wherever they want. So I will give a quick example of influence we have or the technology we deploy have on social systems. And just to foster the discussion. And I will focus here on a very interesting conjecture that is conjectures of von Förster's. It was asked for, but it was formulated after a question of Ivan Illich that asked himself, why do collective dynamics sometimes seem to become autonomous from individual wills to the point of producing counterproductive collective behavior? So this exchange was reported by Dupuy, and one answer of Heinz von Förster's was that individuals are linked to each other on the one hand, and they are linked to the totality on the other hand. The links between the individual can be more or less rigid. The technical terms he uses is trivial. The more trivial they are, the less, by definition, knowledge of the behavior of one of them brings information to the observer who already knows the behavior of the other. So the conjecture is as follows. I conjecture that the more trivial the interrelationship, the inter-individual relations are, the more the behavior of the totality will appear to the individual elements that compose it as endowed with its own dynamics beyond their control. So the more correlation you have between individual action, the more individual will feel bound to follow like some of collective dynamics they cannot act on. So these conjectures was turned into theorem in 1991. But there is another side of these conjectures. I realize that these conjectures has a paradoxical characters, but it must be understood. So this is still von Förster that is speaking. That it only makes sense because one takes here the point of view inside the systems of the element on the totality. For an observer outside the systems, it goes without saying that the triviality of the relations between elements is, on the contrary, conducive to a conceptual mastery in the form of modeling. So I have shown in this paper, we can discuss later of that we have very clear example of these conjectures on the ICT infrastructure we have here. So what we see here, and there have been some experiments that has just described almost word by word this conjecture without making any reference to that conjectures, but just because they were describing what they saw as the effect of the ICTs. What we saw is that ICTs change the point of rigidity of inter-individual relation. For example, recommendation, rating, likes, etc. They lead to an ubiquity of judgment actions whose ease of integration, dissemination or implementation are proportional to their standardization. And we see this wave of collective behavior online. And one of the consequences is the reinforcement through this ICT's infrastructure of past dependencies renders the collective dynamics more unpredictable and more manipulable at once. This is really important. So manipulable by who? The ones who has the external point of view, for example, the GAFAM. So we can discuss about that later. So just to give you an overview of inside and outside point of view, this is, for example, the work we do as a complex system institutes, and we can show, and well, not the first one, but we just show that how publicly as it's possible that by the mere observation of tweeters, for example, you can have an external point of view of the political landscapes of a country. Here it is, each dot here is a Twitter account, and this was done during the presidential election, and this is the political landscapes of French during 2016, sorry. And you see really clear structure with party and how they articulate with each other. So you can identify political opinion of everybody in this picture just by looking at their interaction. And you can also monitor the evolution of these landscapes. For example, this is the landscapes during the election. This is the landscape just after the election. And this is the landscapes now in 2022, in 21. So by mere observation of digital traces, this is just a toy example on very few data from Twitter, but imagine what can the GAFAM do, where you have access to all the exchange, the mail, geolocalization, etc. So this is an example of external external point of view. And actually, if you look at application of von Foster conjectures, then you have two ways of acting on social systems. One is from inside, using some astroturfing, which is create the illusion of a consensus or spontaneous public support for a cause. So astroturfing, for example, it was action during the French presidential election with the dissemination of fake news among some specifically targeted communities. We can also and another way to influence these global social systems is to act on the connectivities. And for example, one of the first steps the GAFAM did recently to act on this connectivity globally is when they just suspended the account of Donald Trump during the Capitol riots. This was very important because they had at that time the information that violent groups were preparing extremely violent action the days coming, and they know that if they maintain the rigidity between all these people in the sense of von Foster's, then we will have some collective dynamics. And so what they did is they suspend Donald Trump, so they just perturb the systems. And after they also suspend, sorry, this is an old tweet. This is the first time when there was a Floyd event, they just removed the capacity to retweet one of the Trump tweets just to avoid like propagation of violence. So this was their explanation. And after, during the Capitol riot, they just suspended the account. And when you look at now retrospectively what's happened now, and this is very interesting. So after the Capitol riot, Twitter, they just suspended lots of accounts linked to that riot. And here, this is an analysis just published in Nature yesterday, where you see the political landscapes of the United States. So it's core political accounts on Twitter. And this is the left, this is the right, and they have suspended 70,000 Twitter accounts, which are the black dot here. And what you see is two things here. First, the black dots, which were influential, they were like very disseminated into the political rights and pro-Trump, so they were acting like just a mesh of influential accounts. And also you have a part here that we could comment. So here you clearly have a suspicion of, before that, trying to influence the system from the inside through multiplication of accounts. But the other interesting thing here is to see that Twitter, for one of the first times, or it's regularly purge fake account, but here is dedicated. He has specifically targeted some group, and so here from one of the first time Twitter tried to influence the global dynamics, and we can talk about this later. So just to finish, to conclude, the question is, are we moving to the social engineering that will put an end to self-transcendences of social dynamics? This is really an open question. What are the role of this GAFAM on the social dynamics and how they will influence the global dynamics? But another question is that if we come back to our idea that humanity is underway, undercoming a leap in complexities and is becoming one global entities, then the question is, what will be the relation between these entities and its environment? I mean, the Earth or something like that. So if you come back to Earth, and this was brilliantly exposed in the former talk, is that what you see is that now most of the state variables of Earth are just dependent on the living of this big humanity organism. What you look at the temperature, the ocean acidification, etc., etc. So what you can think of Gaia has been reduced by humanity to intestinal flora status. It's someone that we need to live. We need it to live, but we are controlling some key parameters. So just to finish, this is my two last slides. So now if we think about perspectives, so this is really conjectures, but there is a question about what kind of decision-making process will develop this new entity. I mean, and we can have three paths at least that I have described here in this paper. First is homunculus, is like entities like, for example, China is this way. They develop panoptics to help to control the mass. So you have one central control that will determine the future of humanities. And this is possible because you have massive IT systems. So we have an emergence of such entities in China now. The other is to say that maybe we will delegate to AE some of its collective decision to protect ourselves, and AI will become the new exteriority for mankind, play the same role as religion before, to help it to contain the violence it contains. And one third way would be to think about a decentralized worldwide governance. And here, macroscopes and maybe the Cybersyn that I put in the title was one of the first implementation of this. So microscope and ICT will enable collective and reflexive decision. And one of these collective decision is also like what Biogeochemical does. So we have, I think, at least these three paths for our future that are very different, and we really have to think which one we will take. And we can have them commented by an AI. So I just leave you this. This is these three options commented by the GPT-2 algorithm. So where you just give what is involved here, and he complete with what he has learned so far. So I just find this funny. He has an opinion on everything. So maybe option 2 is plausible, but I don't think this is the best one. Okay, so thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, David.
So I will stop the sharing. No.
Oh, yeah, maybe if you can.
Yeah.
Okay, so I recover also my video. Okay, so thanks a lot to both speakers. And while I wait for questions on the chat, maybe if you can give me back the organizer, David. I wanted to show something, but then, I mean,
so,
yeah.
Pablo,
Yep. Yes.
I have many questions for both of our contributors.
Oh, so do I. So since I have the microphone, let me just give one question and then I'll give you the, okay?
Of course. I was proposing to see how many questions we are going to get in the chat. If we don't have so many, we can talk more, and otherwise we cut it.
I'm looking at the chat also. Okay. And no, I mean, my one question is maybe to you both is this idea. I put this body politic because this analogy of the society or humanity to an organism is, of course, a very old analogy, and it should, of course, be discussed. But I mean, more generally, my main question that is raised to both to David and to Sébastien is what is the politics that is derived from the complexity point of view, and what is strange here is that in some sense it seems that the complexity view highlights of course, the complexity and then the unpredictability and the difficulty to manage or to predict. And at the same time, Sébastien stressed that explicitly, it seems that the Earth system science led to some geoengineering. And David also mentioned the social engineering in his slides. So in one study that we had made about complexity, we found that a common denominator of many studies was, besides a rhetoric of unpredictability and all that, the fact of using formal models and computer models, and then the possibility of some control, and then geoengineering or social engineering are, of course, important examples of control. So can you maybe discuss further this issue of controlling, I mean, complexity leading to control? And Hayek, to finish my question, is David quoted Hayek's distinction between cosmos and taxis, and Hayek insisted a lot on the complexity and unpredictability, and had very good criticisms about even the economics of prediction and all that, but at the same time used a mythical market as a way of controlling things. And at the end, I mean, I think that control by the market is the real argument by Hayek. So he used predictability only to counter planification and not to counter the market. So, okay, I stop my remarks, but can you just discuss this paradox of apparent paradox of complexity? I don't know, anyone?
Sébastien, you want to start?
You have to put your microphone on, Sébastien, then I don't...
Okay, so thank you, for the question, which will, enables me to do the part I didn't have the time to do. So first remark regarding the IGBP and system science politique, and in particular the way it's different from IPCC. And then I will focus more precisely on your question. So the way it engaged into politics was not through quantitative prediction from complex models feeding the report of an institution gathering and reviewing the work of thousands of experts. So this was the functioning of IPCC, and IGBP didn't work like that. It works through the diffusion of normative concepts such as Anthropocene boundaries tipping elements. The first point is on how it works. The second point is that so IGBP presented a new object to be governed, and there has been a countless analysis, Foucauldian analysis, expanding the biopolitics of Foucault to the geopolitics of Earth system science. And the third point is that it had an ambivalent relationship. IGBP had an ambivalent relationship with IPCC, in that it argued for a stronger engagement in policy than standard physicians of the climate. It argued also for the inclusion of more entities than simply CO2. And it also put forward the importance of non-linearities and catastrophes, which lead me to address more precisely your question regarding how to deal with complexity and predictability and policy. And also there is a link with the importance of models that you mentioned. And one important, thing that is noteworthy regarding system science practice is that it sort of refrains from using very complex models from the climate community with a high resolution, both spatial and temporal. By contrast, system science reduced spatial and temporal resolution in order to use the time calculus to include more and more entities and more processes and more link between these entities and processes. So this made the new kind of models which were labeled models of intermediate complexity, and they were not that much used to predict the future, but more to understand the nature of the Earth. They were used to put forward ontological arguments rather than to predict the functioning of the Earth. And the way then IGBP and system scientists engage in geoengineering and the way to handle it is through what they call adaptive management. And so I have a quote, and then I will end on this quote. Described in terms, so I quote, described in terms more commonly used at smaller scales, adaptive management means that environment and development decisions are tentatively made on the basis of imperfect information, but constantly revised according to the influx of relevant new scientific findings. And when I read sentences like that in the reports and articles, it really evoked me what Andrew Pickering was talking about with the way English cyberneticians engage with the world more on the basis of practice and adjustments rather than on the basis of knowledge which enable prediction and control. So I don't know if that answered the question, Pablo.
Oh, Pablo, we cannot hear you. Pablo.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, you can hear me. Okay. No, just before David answers, because since you mentioned Andy Pickering work, he had also a question that maybe is worth answering right now, is how the report Limits to Growth in 72 fits into this history of Earth system science. Just because you're on that topic, maybe it's better if you answer that question right now, and then we go to David.
Their relationship, for instance, Schellnhuber, who is a prominent actor of Earth system science, is member of the Club of Rome. And for there is one interesting, the idea of planetary boundaries, reintroduce this idea of limits, which was put forward by the Limits to Growth report. Yet there is, I think, one important conceptual shift, so to speak. I mean, the Limits to Growth report was mostly centered on question of resources. I mean, the one important issue was whether we'll have enough petroleum. So the one central concept was the idea of resources, that is stock of stuff which get exhausted as you consume it. If you look at all the planetary boundaries, the 9 processes of the planetary boundaries, none of them are resources. They are all fluxes on which we have, on which we act by excess. I mean, climate change, we push too much stuff out in the atmosphere. Ozone hole, same things. I mean, even one interesting aspect of planetary boundaries regarding this difference between resource and flux is nitrogen and phosphorus. So nitrogen and phosphorus are the most important fertilizer for agriculture. And the issue with planetary boundaries is not that we won't have enough nitrogen and phosphorus, but that we are already putting too much out in the river and ocean, so that we have a eutrophication phenomenon. So there are, so to sum up the links between Limits to Growth and the system sign, there are institutional links through the Club of Rome, and also ideological link regarding the way one think about a global model of the environment to understand humanity's relationship with its earthly environment.
Okay, great, thanks. So David, maybe your answer, and then we go to Fabrice.
Yes, so just to wrap to your question. So when I was mentioning social engineering, I was just speaking about a dystopia that we are beginning to witness. And I just reminded the chat some remark from Foster, who said that while our preoccupation with the trivialization of our environment may be in one domain useful and constructive, in another domain it is useless and destructive. Trivialization is dangerous panacea when a man applies it to himself, and I think, unfortunately, somehow it's what we observed with all the design of social media platforms, etc., that are made so that you just react in a predictable way. But just about the controlling of complex systems and environment, etc., I think that it's not a question of controlling complex systems. It's, as Andrew Pickering stated, it's like interacting and adapt to them. And I think that we just go and with it and learn, as the AI said in my slides. And if we look at, for example, what we do with vaccine, I think it's a very interesting analogy. We are not controlling our immune system with vaccine. We are just influence some of their attractors and make them learn, so to speak, some things, but we are not controlling them. They are still autonomous and developing one. So I think this is a kind of interaction we should seek to with our environment and ecosystem in general, and also both artificial, like economics, and also natural. We should look at how we can interact with them, not so much to control them, but to avoid certain attractors and to co-evolve with them.
Okay, thanks. Great. Okay, I understand better this. I mean, we have links between the different talks, and that's nice. So Fabrizio, up to you.
Thank you, guys. First, before asking my questions, I want to make two parallels. So one is that maybe the description that David has made of vaccine can be, we can draw the following comparison, like vaccine and controlling the immunitarian system is like the comparison between a nudge, a government through the nudge or nudges, and a dictatorship, right? And the second comparison I wanted to do is between IPCC and IGBP. With Sébastien, we have talked several times, and we are friends, but I never realized that there was this kind of comparison between these two groups and what my computational epidemiologist on one side, which correspond to what IPCC does, and to what my quantitative geographers do, compared to IGBP. Basically, like IPCC, my computational epidemiologists who get inspiration from meteorology and climatology explicitly say that they can predict the pandemics or the epidemics evolution, while my quantitative geographers do exactly like what Sébastien said about Earth system scientists. They try to understand at a meso level how things work, and they don't predict. And I don't know what Sébastien thinks about it, but probably it depends both on cultural reasons. For example, computational epidemiologists are normally physicists who think who tend to think that there are simple rules at the basis of very complex phenomena, while geographers, like probably Earth system scientists, where there are many more other kind of scientists other than physicists, they tend to see that the system is very, very, very complex. There are so many variables, which is even difficult to understand how it works, and so it's almost impossible to predict it. I don't know if Sébastien, you want to say something about this, or I skip to my questions.
No, I don't have any particular comment. I agree that there's, I mean, the way you describe it, there clearly is a parallel between those aspects. So yeah, it's interesting.
Okay. So it makes sense. So what I say, okay.
Yeah.
Physicists are the nasty guys here, physicists, as you identify them. Okay.
Well,
Thanks,
No. I also admire computational epidemiologists, though, because they actually do very nice stuff. No. It's just a cultural thing that from which depends a certain metaphysics and a certain approach to science. But I wasn't judging. Sorry if I gave this impression. And anyway, my question for David is that in his article about the unlikely encounter between von Förster and Snowden, in the conclusion, you write, David, so at a certain moment, you claim that society tends to function increasingly like an integrated system. And some lines below, you claim that in such a society, education is neither a right nor a privilege, it is a necessity. It is each individual's responsibility to determine his or her way forward. So it seems to me that there is a tension between the two. Even if you align yourself with Dupuy's complex methodological individualism, the first sentence seems to me, it resembles to holism and structuralism, if you want, while the second more to classical methodological individualism. So my question is the contradiction only apparent because the hegemony of the one or the other has to be taken not as eternal or structural, but as dynamical and contextual, which makes it depend on the place that collective intelligence takes at each particular historical moment. So my question is basically, and my second question was much more simple. Can complexity, according to you, help democracy to strengthen itself? And if so, how? But both questions actually bring you to say something about your vision, your view of collective intelligence. So I'll stop here and then I'll ask the questions for Sébastien later.
Okay, so I answer to this question first. Yeah. Okay.
Yes. Please.
From our point of view, there is not at all any contradiction in that. You have complex systems that are formed about entities and that form like global structure, like societies, institutions, etc. What I am saying at the end of this paper and the other paper is that we have we witness like a percolation of all the many different societies and subsystems that humanity has formed into like a more integrated things where everything is communicating. And for example, if China decided to ruin their environment, it ruins also our environments. If US decide to make it a nuclear winter, it will be for everybody. So and when we have like a pandemics and all the economy is down, so we are more and more integrated. So this is the effect of just percolation between many different societies that have their own culture and maybe some interact sometimes, to like a big organism where still organism some sub entity exists. So there will be still some sub-government, etc. But we are so much interdependent that we are more integrated, and so that we have that level. So one of the reason of this integration is worldwide communications and the fact that we are interacting with each other, and that opinions and moods, etc., spread worldwide like that. So this means one of the effect of this, one of the cause of this percolation is also the way the relation we have with each other, the rigidity we have when we interact with each other. And what I am saying is the sentence you quoted was from Foerster. What he's saying is that when you have like this systems, humanity inside the systems, education is very important because it's important for the individual entities to adjust their local interaction and to detrivialize their local interaction. For example, when you claim that people should have a sens critique, so to watch the information they receive and check their information. This is part of the education. If you just don't check and react like that, saying that all fake news are as if all fake news were true, then you can have like a massive movements that are just no factual basis. So when I link this to education, I just wanted to remind that when you go, you have a system that is more and more integrated. So when you have more and more correlation between parts of these systems and other parts of that systems, and where the fate of the entire systems depend on this collective dynamics, then you should be careful about how this what are the collective dynamics and what drives them. And the fact to have educated people and to people that can locally take decision according to their local context, but have some informed action on that, then it is very critical to have like a global behavior that is, I mean, that does not endanger the full system. But just this, so it's not between individualism and holism. Just that we have really in the complex in a methodological individualism, where you have this downwards and upward causation between entities and superstructures, but these dynamics are very influenced by the capacities of the entities, and as Alex said, the cognitive capacities or regularities of the entities. And this comes first through education. So sorry to have been long, but
no, because it gives the idea that the future is open because of this interaction between downward and bottom-up causation. And so the change, the innovation, the twist for future actions can come either from the top or from the bottom, and it's unpredictable, radically. Right?
And just to add something is that when you have some dictatorships, one of the first target is education. Trump he said, "I like uneducated people because uneducated people are easily to manipulate, but not manipulate, also collectively manipulate." So this is why this dimension is very important.
Okay.
So Andy Pickering has been raising his hand for a long time now.
Sorry.
So maybe Andy, if you want
there are two raised hands. I'm sorry, guys.
Now the other one is David. I think that maybe it was.
Oh yeah, sorry.
Yeah. Okay, I had my hand up. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Right. I find it very interesting. It's nice for me to know that a lot of these complexity models are about kind of creating an imagining the kinds of things that might happen with complex systems rather than detailed prediction. And that fits in, as David said, very nicely with the idea of adaptive management. You have to find out where you are with these systems. You can't calculate it in advance. I just wanted to agree with that. The other point was that I asked about the limits to growth report in relation to Earth systems science. One thing that strikes me there is that limits to growth was all about, it was a model of the coupling of human beings to the planet and how we use resources and what the effect on us would be of doing that. And I find it kind of striking that in Earth systems science, humanity has been kind of split off. So all the modeling work is about what happens, chemical, thermodynamic, physical, biological senses. But human beings are somewhere on the margin, kind of as external inputs and outputs. It's as though, we've gone from a kind of post-humanist picture of the planet and limits to growth to an old-fashioned humanist or even anti-humanist picture in Earth system sciences. And I wondered if maybe Sébastien had got some response to that.
Sébastien, we can't hear you. You should. I don't know if you are.
Yes.
Okay, great.
So thank you very much, Andy. I have a response and a question also for you. So I start with the response, perhaps. So the question of the place of humanity within IGBP and system science was a topic of central discussion on many levels. I mean, in the 80s, on this Breatherton diagram, you see human activities, as you said, as an output or something sort of almost external to the system. And at that time, there was a heavy discussion on whether social sciences were to be included within IGBP or left aside. And many people wanted to include it, but they had to back up because of physicists arguing that there was already too much stuff
again, physicists
to add social sciences. And then later on in the late 90s, there was explicit reflection on, I mean, the way to make models and the way to draw diagrams and to represent things, and explicit reflection on precisely what you said. I mean, the fact that humanity was external to it, and at that time, other diagrams emerged and other models emerged in which they try to explicitly put humanity more at the center. And it was after this reflection that
Sébastien, your microphone.
Seb, we don't
sorry, I clicked on space. There was some. So it was after the late 90s and after this reflection that there was some institutional merging between IGBP's community and human and social sciences of the IHDP for international. I forgot the acronym. But well, en gros, geographers, economists, and other social sciences. So yeah, there were reflections on precisely what you mentioned. And then my question was precisely about this adaptive management. I mean, in your talk, the adaptive management and the way you cyberneticians engage with the world sort of lead them to refrain from this ideal of control and domination of nature. And what was puzzling to me was precisely the fact that, I mean, the same idea of management, I mean, and adaptive management to the world does not lead some system scientists to refrain from what is arguably the most Promethean techniques of all time, which is geoengineering. So I wonder whether you had some clues about why this might be the case, or some comments on this, or...
I don't know. I mean, can you explain again what the problem is? Is it that? Well, I mean, one thing I could say is that whenever I read the literature on complex systems, I'm struck by a kind of inner contradiction. Very often at the beginning of a paragraph, you'll find somebody saying, you know, and this means that the whole system is emergent and you can't predict where it's going to go. And then you read the paragraph and you come to the end and the author expresses the hope that this is going to be a kind of magic key which is going to enable us to control the whole thing. So I think, exactly. You know, complexity theorists, maybe, I don't know whether it's a psychological problem. You know. So their technical work leads them to focus on emergence and surprise, which I love. But they're trained as, of course, scientists. So they feel like they ought to be able to produce a definite solution to this, that, or the other. And they default back to things like geoengineering. That's a kind of quick, off-the-cuff answer.
It's not a psychological problem. It's a funding problem.
A what problem?
Funding. You mean for the money?
Yeah, right.
Control.
Yeah, you need a rationale for doing this work, so you have to be able to promise. You know, I mean, a lot of the stuff on complex systems from Santa Fe had to do with banking years ago, right?
Yes.
So the mathematicians have to offer the bankers something, you know, concrete to hold on to. Yeah.
But can I say something about this? Because I think really to go back, Pablo feels like targeted because we talk about physics.
No, not again, Fabrizio. No, stop.
But
Andy was a physicist.
Yeah, I was a physicist too.
Yeah, but yeah, you know the concept of exception. You know, no, I'm joking. I'm joking. I'm joking. The thing is that I mean I will quote Murray Gell-Mann, who gave the general idea. I'm not saying of all SFI members, but mostly and certainly the official discourse. The sentence was almost poetical, and basically there's no normal grammatical structure. He said complexity arising from deep simplicity. That's it. That's the whole SFI project is exactly the conclusion of all the chaos theory, which said basically that this apparently chaos, apparently randomness, apparently unpredictability, radical unpredictability is not so radical. It depends on our ignorance. And as long as you get back to the simple rules, then the interaction of these simple rules will make a very big complexity arise. Basically, that's the concept.
Yeah, maybe I can. Yeah, Andy, you see, this is typically the example of the cellular automata.
I mean, that's fine.
To be unpredictable, but it is not. And actually, when I worked on Hayek, and I made this parallel between Hayek. Maybe Sébastien, if you can turn down your microphone because okay, thanks. But when I work on Hayek, and Hayek uses a lot this argument of complexity that is beyond the individual brain, so you need the market, and using cognitive science. And he actually, I mean, it's an apparent complexity, exactly. I mean, it's not the same complexity as the complexity of physicists, okay, that says, okay, everything is laws of nature, and it's only because there are many, many processes entangled that it seems complex, but it's not. Hayek's complexity is less trivial, but it is anyway. It's like the AI complexity that can be tamed by a good tool like the market or artificial intelligence. You know, I mean, neural nets. And really, the real complexity is more like the British cybernetics. I mean, at least some of the British cybernetics, or Dewey's vision of society, on, I mean, a more philosophical one. So I think that there are different gradations of complexity, and most of the complexity coming from natural sciences is like an apparent complexity. And then maybe this can help explaining this paradox that you insist on complexity only to try to tame it, and also as a rhetorical argument saying that, okay, it seemed complexity, but now I understand it and I have the key to understand a further aspect of that. And all these universal, laws that that could explain, and we'll discuss about that for Prigogine, thermodynamics and self-organization and all that stuff. Some people have used that as a new way of a universal explanation for biological, social, and natural systems, not in terms of laws of physics, but in terms of, I don't know, out of equilibrium thermodynamics or self-organizing stuff or whatever, or autopoiesis maybe, I don't know. Okay. So maybe there is another, a different way of being reductionist.
Can I react on this? Or?
Yeah, of course. And then we have to end up, but then of course, maybe a quick reaction for anyone that wants to react, because I don't want to have the conclusion.
Yeah. Just I want to come back to the two fatal conceits that I was mentioning in my presentation. The way we think about interacting with complex systems is neither we cannot control them at all, or we can control them at all. And if you came back to the analogy with immune systems, when you do vaccine, you are not controlling your immune systems, but because you understood some key property of how the immune system works, then you can prevent it from going in some direction. The thing is that you can prevent him from going to some direction when you already know the direction, because you have to know how the virus is to defend towards that virus. But since this complex systems lives in an open phase state, so all the phase states of this system are quite open. You have constantly new virus, etc. You cannot predict all the future. So you interact with complex systems by trying to understand the key mechanism of how they adapt, or how the internal dynamics are changed with interaction with our environment. And then you can, on a very limited range of events, when you are informed, also you can prevent them to go into certain areas. So it is why it is constantly adapting, because their environment and these complex systems themselves are constantly evolving. So you have to adapt your management by putting new vaccines and new strains, etc. But this does not mean that you cannot do anything. You do things, but you have to do it constantly and be interacting with it.
Mm-hmm.
Pablo, I don't know. I know that we have to go, but I wanted just to mention. Maybe we don't have the time to discuss. Do you guys let me mention just an article which I think it's very useful for our discussions? Yeah.
You can give the reference too.
Yeah. I put it on the chat, because when Sébastien described the Lovelock, Margulis, and Shell-Nuber, like corresponding to first to second cybernetics and then SFI, and at the end he showed that basically all Earth system scientists, even if they apparently have a different discourse, are favorable for geoengineering. There is an article which is quite old. It's called How Do We Know We Have Global Environmental Problems? Science and the Globalization of Environmental Discourse, by Peter Taylor and Frederick Battle, published on Geoforum in 1992. And basically, they precisely take the model of limits to growth, limits to growth that Andy was mentioning before. And what they say is that environmental problems, if they look to us as global problems, it's because they are framed as such since the beginning. This kind of global vision or view brings scientists to try to find a general global external viewpoint. And they say that basically this global vision give only two possible solutions to environmental problems: either the absolutely bottom moral individual solutions, as every one of us has to act, or the upper solution, which is the technocratical geoengineering solution. And by framing the problem only globally, basically they erase the intermediate sphere, which is the political sphere, the social movement sphere, the national sphere, etc. And so the global technocratical view is intrinsically depoliticizing. Today it's quite almost banal to say that, but they really nicely explain this kind of problems. And then probably the last thing they say. Yes, and another nice remark that they do is that by adopting this global view and technocratical view, scientists, politicians, and technocrats are doomed somehow to be surprised and constantly surprised by the unpredictable conflicts of social movements and improbable coalitions that come up and pop up everywhere every time. That's all. I don't know if Sebastian wants to react to this.
Yeah, maybe very rapidly, because we have. I wanted just to make some advertising for next Monday, but yeah, maybe a few words.
No, just thanks for the paper. I don't have any smart things to say, so I'm just.
Okay, so let's hope that Aniello Lampo and Floriana Gargiulo will have some smart things to say next Monday still on algorithms, and as David has talked about algorithms, and then some models by Floriana Gargiulo, who has collaborated with Fabrizio. Okay, so we'll have next Monday quite different topics. Yeah,
but Pablo, just to say that probably they will have two different positions. So they will. I wouldn't say that they will really debate, because I think they agree on fundamental things, Aniello and Floriana. But they will say two different things about algorithms, and so it will be nice because it will be richer to articulate the two.
Okay, and then we'll have two physicists. Wow. Okay, in February 22nd. Okay. So, okay, thanks everyone. Thanks David and Sébastien for your talks. Thanks for the discussion, Fabrizio and Andy, and let's meet again next Monday. Okay?
Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everyone. Thanks.